Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is someone that I met and have worked with over the years. He was the External Innovation Communication Global Head at Johnson & Johnson, and he has recently decided to take his life back and stepped out into the private world and is just gardening and doing coaching and spending time with his family, which I know he loves. But he over the last 20 years was a global head of communication at very large life sciences companies. He worked at Johnson & Johnson. Obviously, he also worked at AstraZeneca. He worked at Pfizer, all the names that we are now much more familiar with post-pandemic or mid-pandemic, I guess. And so Oliver has dedicated his life to communications, and he's dedicated his life to healthcare and innovation and making a difference for patients who really are in need. And so he's a really great guy, and I am so thrilled that he finally has time to join me here on the Speak Like a Leader podcast. So Oliver, welcome. Will you fill in any of the blanks that I left?
I think you've done a tremendous job introducing me. Thank you for your flattering introduction. It's great to be on your podcast, John. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I don't think that it's any secret that we have worked together over the years and that we have really come to enjoy each other. And so I'm just glad we get a chance to do this. And by the way, just to get this out, if you want to connect with Oliver, if you want to go find out more about Oliver, you can go to linkedin.com/in/Oliver Stohlmann. And I will spell that for you really quickly. It's OLIVER STOHLMANN. I'll say it one more time. Oliver, OLIVER STOHLMANN. So that's linkedin.com/in/Oliver Stohlmann. And he's a certified communications trainer. He's a facilitator and a personal and business coach. He's also, like me, a passionate dad, an avid skier, and unlike me, he's a professional hiking guide. So he's a great guy to know.
The amount of facts you've collected about me is amazing. Thank you. It's all true too.
Well, thanks. You're welcome. So Oliver, you recently made a move out of the business world, out of that high pressure corporate environment, which we're going to talk about because I think you've got a bunch of really great things to offer people from your time in that world. I think you can really, some of the things in your pre-publication blog post that I read and some of the things that we've talked about and some of our conversations leading up to this, I know you have a lot to offer people who are either entrepreneurs or in large corporations, ways to work within corporate culture, all that kind of stuff. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. But I think if I'm not missing my mark, you had an event. You had one of those life-changing events in December of 2017. And I think that led to some internal changes at work for you in the moment, but I think that also kind of ended up just popping you out of the corporate world altogether. Will you, so that is, if that's true or not, but will you tell us that story?
Absolutely. I'm happy to, although it's a very personal story that I've only told colleagues in my company to date and never externally. Sorry, John.
The phones, no, it's okay. The phones do keep ringing even when you leave corporate culture.
It won't interrupt any longer.
Don't worry.
Maybe I'll start that way. Thanks again for your very kind introduction. Yes, like you listed, all these fantastic, very successful companies I had the privilege to work for. I've been the last 20 plus years an international, comms leader in all these positions and companies with several of the world's predominant, pharma and life science companies. But the pleasure that I took out of that, more than the great science even, was the opportunity of working in all these diverse, not only roles, but countries, regions, with lots of, colleagues of different cultural backgrounds and experiences, and learning from all these, people and peers and team members and stakeholders that I was involved with. And one key, before I tell you my anecdote, I want to just say one key responsibility in all these roles that I always felt I had was to ensure the speaking success of my senior business leaders and other company spokespeople, both externally, in media interviews, in public speaking conferences, whatnot, but also internally to inspire employees and their teams and all that. And that's also how you and I got to know each other. Let me clarify that, because I've in that capacity, I have been enlisting the support of a range of specialized coaches, and you've been one of the most, one of those who've convinced me most of the power of investing in, shaping the speaking abilities of these leaders and spokespeople. And that,
Oliver, on that note, can I interject something real quick?
Absolutely.
Because I just got something and I think you might like it. And I would love to just hear what you think about it. Recently, somebody handed me this gem. They said, think about pie. P-I-E. P is your performance. I is the impression that you make. And E is your brief moments of exposure.
I see.
That you get like in front of the board or whatever, right? So you're doing all this performance, right? Like 98% of your time is performing and you're doing all this great performance. But then if you get up in that moment of exposure and it doesn't go well, that it's like, it's a multiplier, right? And if it's less than 1, it actually hurts you.
Yep.
Right? So
I like that pie concept.
Yeah, it's real. Isn't that good?
We'll get back, I think, to the E in the pie later in the conversation. What I relate the E to spontaneously is the word emotions, because in all these steps, of the pie, I would argue to create that emotional connection with the audience, whether that's the board or the wide public or the journalist, who then decides what he writes or she writes about the interview. If you don't manage to create that emotional connection, all the facts, everything hardly counts if you can't touch people and make the information you're sharing relatable to them and relevant to them, right?
Amen, brother. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, let me answer your request and tell you. I'll try to be brief. About that. I would call it probably a life-defining moment, because it's true. You've done your research well. I had. In my view, this defining moment that made me rethink my whole career at the time, my career path so far, my values, and how I wish to spend my future days, and which also helped me develop a deep appreciation, to be honest, for what I have in life already, my values, my family, all the things that are important, in addition to a rewarding career. And the whole story starts and ends and happens on December the 13th, 2017. And I remember the date so well because it's a special day in my life. It's my daughter's 17th birthday. And that particular December 13th in 2017 happened to be a really chilly, cold winter night, a few days before Christmas, obviously. And after a very long office day, I'm driving home on the highway. We used to live in New Jersey at that point, because I wanted to catch her before she goes out with her friends. I wanted to congratulate her and spend a few moments. So it's that bitter cold, winter night. I'm driving home, the highway almost deserted. Snow begins to kick in. And I'm driving, I should mention, a little car. It's a fantastic little car, but it's a little car, a Ford Fiesta, red, a little tin can. There's not much protection around you. Let me leave it there. And I'm driving and, hanging in my thoughts and trying to get home. And before I know it, all of a sudden, there's this big, loud, bang, something connects with my car. The brakes are screeching, the horn is shrieking. All the alarm system of this little car sounds like hell, like crazy. All the lights inside the car, outside the car, everything starts blinking, and it goes, oh, poop, oh, porn. It doesn't stop. It smells. I remember, I'll never forget that smell. It smells of burning rubber going up in my nostrils. And all I know is I've lost total control of the car. I cannot see what's happening because all the airbags, imagine, all around, all the windows have suddenly inflated, and of course are obscuring my view through any of the windows. Glass is shattering. I'm just feeling this major force push me along the highway sideways.
Oh.
At any moment, I remember I thought, any moment I'll be squashed against a wall or something at the side of the motorway, or my tiny little car will just roll over and be kicked over by whatever has crashed into it. So that, continues it felt like an eternity. Of course, it was probably just seconds. Everything comes to a halt. The car alarms and the lights are still continuing to blink and blast really loudly, but at least the motion has stopped. So slowly I'm getting my senses together, and I'm trying the driver's door, and luckily it's opening. So I'm getting out into the chilly night air, turning around sideways to spot this huge US size, lorry whose bonnet is still firmly connected into the side of my little car. And the lorry, I don't need to describe American lorries to you, but maybe for audiences in other countries, that's easily 20 or 30 times larger than my little, small plastic car.
And lorry is truck for people in America.
Sorry, I used to live in the UK too before that, so I'm still mixing some of the terms. I do apologize. So the truck is still connected as we stand there, connected, in the middle of the highway into my car. And the young black driver is jumping down from the driver's cabin in shock himself. And I remember he mutters, "Oh man, you're right." So things take their course. We are both all right. Luckily, it's just damage to the cars. The highway patrol arrives. They test both drivers for alcohol and the usual thing, drugs. Ages seem to go by until a towing truck takes me and my car off the scene. But it is probably not before I was sitting in that towing truck next to the driver, still shivering from, I think, not only the cold, but the shock of what has just happened.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that this could easily have been my very last drive home. And that my daughter's birthday might potentially never have been the same ever again. So without wanting to dramatize this more, in my life, this was a pretty, stark thing to happen. I've never had an accident of whatever, dimension before that. And from there, with probably a regained consciousness and resolve for what is, as I said earlier, what's important in life, or what should be important in life, I first changed within the company I used to work for into a new role to help drive more and more relevant innovation to patients.
By the way, just a minor moment.
Sure.
Wasn't that the World Without Disease initiative?
Oh yeah, happy to tell you a bit about that.
Let's come back to that in a second, because I just love those words, right?
No, very happy
anyway,
to elaborate about that a bit as well. But I'm at my story's end, because what really I just wanted to say is it did something. Going through that did something in me. It did make me rethink how I wanted to live, what career I wanted to have. And the first step, the first consequence was, as I just mentioned, I changed out of the current job where I led communications for the pharma sector of Johnson & Johnson into a new role, more broadly, helping drive the way the company connects with external partners, with external innovation, and together ideally, can achieve more and bring more innovation of all sorts, health-related innovation to patients and consumers in need. And then following 3 years of setting up, helping to set up, that new innovation-focused J&J unit, which is now up and running and in really good hands with our business leaders led by Dr. Bill Haidt, it ultimately led to my decision to depart big industry altogether, at least for now, at this junction, and refocus my life and the impact I could have towards hopefully a meaningful new purpose.
Yeah. Awesome. So yes, if you're listening and you're wondering, that means that right now Oliver is available for coaching gigs and consulting gigs. But I happen to know he's really loving his gardening. So you're gonna, it'll be hard to drag him out of that.
That is so true. I'm really enjoying the newly gained freedom, at least for a while.
Yeah. Well, so that's one of those moments, Oliver. And it's funny because I always think about, I think, I guess it's Tony Robbins or someone like that, maybe somebody before him who said, your income is going to be the average of your 5 closest friends' income, And I'm like, oh, well, maybe I need richer friends, but then, but then I was thinking about it and I was like, well, what is the relevance among me and the people that I feel very close to, right? Because I mean, their income, like whatever. One of the things that I've realized is that I think that one defining thing about the people that I feel close to, and you're one of those people, Oliver. We don't have dinner every night because you're on another continent, but you and then another person that that's a good friend of mine who's been on this podcast, Melinda Richter, and I started to realize, wow, I've got a number of friends who all had that moment when they had that brush with death, didn't die, and allowed it to really change their lives. Because I think that people can have a brush with death and it may not always change their lives, right? I have a dear friend who was a chain smoker and had a brush with death and didn't let it change his life, and he's gone, So I think that's one of those, that's a really great story, and it's a really great realization, and you let it change your life. I just want to acknowledge you for that.
Yeah, it's not easy to do that when you think or when you are in a very successful, very long, potentially in an international career. But I also want to be fair and not probably directly relate my experience to that of other people who, without of any of their doing, I was at least driving my car, and I don't think it was my fault either. But there are people in life who are hit by a disease without seeing it coming, and out of that, as you mentioned, they may or may not be able to do something effective about that and use that as a help to change their life. And some will never have that opportunity or didn't have that opportunity. That's why, if you permit me, John, can I come back to that world without disease concept you just mentioned a moment ago?
Because it's so exciting.
A big part of why I decided years and years ago to join first Janssen and then Johnson & Johnson. And you do know, John, and your audience might know that Janssen is the pharmaceutical companies of Johnson & Johnson. So it's basically the same enterprise. One of the biggest reasons I decided to join that enterprise after already a long, diverse industry career was exactly that, what we've internally called, or are still calling, the world without disease approach. And that is led by the person I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Dr. William Haidt, who's now the head of external innovation for the breadth of Johnson & Johnson, including the pharma part, but also medical devices and consumer health products. And in a snapshot, what intrigued me about that and what I find so worthwhile getting behind, not just a company like J&J, but many companies and other stakeholders and government-led organizations, ideally, and patient organizations, is this approach of, why would we even wait, like we've largely done to date, until a disease befalls you or me, and we're properly diagnosed with something? And often and usually in some diseases, like take lung cancer or Alzheimer's or many dreadful diseases, that diagnosis happens still at a very, very late stage, when for many it might be too late to do something meaningful
Yeah.
about that. For
Yes. Yeah.
others, they might have a lucky escape. But Dr. Haidt, who happens to be a doctor as well, and who's treated patients for around 40 years of his life, and started the New Jersey Cancer Institute as the managing director, his approach was always, and I remember him as I speak here, when he says, well, I've never in all those 40 years met patients who came to me saying, Dr. Haidt, I'm so grateful I've developed cancer because I can now come and see you and be healed by you. No, nobody wants that cancer in the first place. Everybody wants to remain healthy. So why, as
Yeah.
a company, as an industry, as a society, as a world, don't we change that trajectory and that approach from, which honestly to date is disease care? We wait until
Yeah.
somebody has a disease to then start doing something about it, with a few exceptions where we are already a bit more proactive, a few diseases. But why don't we change that radically and change that whole trajectory and that whole approach, and say, let's do whatever we can to diagnose a disease when it's probably not even a disease, when it's a developing disease, when it's early in that example, maybe pre-malignant symptoms, not
Yeah.
manifested cancer yet, and then intervene and see how
Yeah.
we can prevent that disease or intercept that disease, or at
Yeah.
least, if both fails, cure that disease rather than
Yeah.
manage it lifelong in many places. And
Yeah.
it won't happen all at the same time. It might not happen quickly. But what made me really proud about this company and being in this wonderful industry in the first place is you can really look yourself in the mirror every day and say to yourself, I'm trying my best, whatever your personal background, whether you're in communications like you and I, or whether you're an HR specialist or a scientist or a financial accountant, or whatever your background is. But you can be that little wheel that makes a little contribution towards a radically new and different and very, very important goal. And that's literally liberating the world from disease. Might be an ambitious title. We did, may I add, we did consider the title, let's create a world with a little less disease, until somebody said, that might not be compelling enough,
No.
to rule it out. So we settled on creating a world without disease.
I think that's really great. And I do think I'm just so glad. I was so glad a few years ago when that, got announced and you guys were talking about it and we were talking about it. I think that's really, really fabulous. It's one of the reasons that I really enjoy supporting Johnson and Johnson, because I do think that, that's just a fabulous goal.
Yeah, and
Love to
I
make,
have to do real justice. I know I mentioned him twice, but I want to mention him one last time, and that's Dr. Haidt, William Haidt. I mean, he's been the spearhead who developed that vision, has pursued it for years. I remember, again, years ago, I think 7 or 8 years ago, when I interviewed for my role at Johnson & Johnson, he was one of the interviewers, and he was probably the first people who ever interviewed me for a job, who did not quiz me on who are you, what have you done, what university degrees, what companies have you had experience with. He flipped it around and told me about his vision of creating, with all these partners and stakeholders, one day a world properly without disease. And I thought, oh my God, at that point, I'd already worked in the industry for about 15 or so years. I thought, that's such a different, to your point of executive speaking, that was just a job interview that he conducted. It wasn't even a speech. But that was so powerful. And the way he connected with me on the basis of that vision was so groundbreaking that I know I'm not the only one, not the first one who joined, in this case, this company, for that vision, for that inspiration, for the power of how he connected on that morning over a breakfast conversation with me as his only audience. So I thank him for a lot of that inspiration.
Well, there you go. I mean, and that's the thing about all of this communication stuff, is a lot of times people think about it in terms of being on stage in front of a huge audience or whatever.
Yeah.
But it all matters just the same on a one-on-one basis or a small group basis or in a meeting basis or with your family or your loved ones. I mean, all that stuff, it's just it's the fabric of life, I think, is communication.
The one thing I learned, and that's probably conventional wisdom, let me just have it out quickly. The one thing I still, after 20 plus years of my career, I'm still thinking about a lot, and I've learned somewhere on the way is there's such different ways of communicating. And of course, there's lots of recipes and lots of philosophies and lots of very good coaches and in-house communications, people like me who help their leaders become more effective. But a major, maybe the key difference for me is, and I related to it at the beginning of our conversation, is to be able to create that emotional connection with any audience, whether that's with me as a candidate over breakfast or whether that's with an audience of millions over a TED talk that is broadcast into the whole world. If you don't manage that to evoke those emotions, people will not think differently. They will unlikely act differently after that conversation or that presentation or that interview, and you can be the greatest expert with all the knowledge that you have. If all you do is download the most compelling, in your view, facts, but it remains unrelatable facts, people will usually find it that unrelatable and they will forget them really. And if you manage to bring that to life, and that's where your forte is, as I got to know you over the years, and that's why I've seen you be very, very effective with some of the leaders that I worked with and I consulted you on to help them create that emotional connection with the audience. And out of that, maybe not surprisingly, but I've also seen people really change as speakers, in that I saw people shed their worries and their fears and begin to not only like but really enjoy public speaking. People who I'm thinking back as I'm talking here of one particular person at my latest company who started as a person who confided. That was probably in the first half year of me having joined J&J. The person confided in me about their fear, their scare in speaking in front of audiences, and that was in the break just before she went up on stage in a completely company internal small audience event of about she would speak in front of about 50 people and was really scared stiff. And then I didn't want to give up, because she's a fantastic relatable business leader in other settings, and I thought she has such potential if only we can help her and guide her. So I think it was me, or I'm not even sure it was me, but one of our colleagues, it might have been the Melinda Richter, who you mentioned a moment ago, but one of the two of us connected her with you, that speaker. And within, I would think, a 6 month or so period of working with her, I saw the difference that made. And then and I was still intensely also checking in with her and listening to her in different settings. I thought, wow, that's been a big, major, I would call it even a U-turn, like 180 degrees different, just the
I
effect when she
remember.
stands there. And you know who I'm talking, right?
Yes.
And then let me just say this last sentence. And then another 3 months later, to my greatest surprise, she began calling me, and we interacted a lot. She was a peer on the same leadership team with me, and she started making these requests to me as the communications leader of that team. Can you help me create more opportunities for public speaking and for internal speaking with large audiences? I thought, oh my God, that's the same person who some 8-9 months ago told me whatever she hated about speaking in front of audiences, how she would mess up in the next, in this next presentation and so forth. And you completely turned her around. And I've seen that. I've seen you do that with several people in this company. So I mean, maybe belated, but thank you very much, John, for the help you gave
very
me
welcome.
and those speakers.
Well, it's why this job is so rewarding, right? To watch that kind of a transformation. And what they all have in common, Oliver, is they were all really, like, they were committed. They cared about what they did. They cared. They had a really empowering context. They all still do have a really empowering context for what they're doing. And all we really needed to do was get rid of some of the things that were in their blind spots, some of the things that were in their way. And all of a sudden, like, there was no question of the commitment. There was no question of the ability. There was none of that was a question. There were just some things that were in the way. When we moved those out of the way, boom,
Yeah, true.
it's amazing. It's so fulfilling.
And I do remember, can I just out you a little bit here? I don't know, I'm not
Sure.
sure
Yeah, of
whether you
course.
want that.
Absolutely.
But I do remember one particular observation I made in this same example with that same leader was that at one point, right before she would walk on a main stage, right before her first big speech after going through your coaching for a while, you did seem to master a kind of light sword fight with her on stage as part of your
Oh,
prep.
yes,
I don't know
we
if
had
you want to talk about that a little bit, but I found that a very, very striking technique to apply
yeah,
at that
but
time.
was we so because I think anybody who knows me very well knows that I've got my pack of lightsabers. I've got my quiver of lightsabers, and I think that I was probably reminding her to make the audience the hero, right? And I said, don't be Luke, be Yoda.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of just showing off with the lightsaber myself, I gave one to her, and I had one, and we had a good old lightsaber duel, which kind of, that also helps burn off a little bit of that energy. At first it's nervous energy. That's when you're focused on yourself. It's nervous. But then the minute that we focus on the audience, we don't call it nervous anymore. We call it excited. Still same energy, dripping sweat, quivering voice. But because we're focused on the audience, it's not nervous anymore. It's excited. So I got her in touch with her excitement about speaking versus her nervousness. We got a little bit of that energy out with those lightsabers, and that was a total blast.
Whatever you did, it did work. I can testify to that, and I saw that and many other examples since. The reactions to that particular performance that day were overwhelming. So good, the audience was thrilled. She herself was like enthusiasm. So I hope you were happy as well. But it's clearly one of the memories I'm holding on to, because I've seen. As I said, I've worked and seen worked with and seen very effective speaking coaches, and some of the examples that I observed live, and some of the things I've learned from you, and I hope I can pass on some of what I've learned as well in our conversation, in our personal private conversations occasionally. But that's always been inspiring. And you think you're at a certain age and you've seen it all, and you keep discovering you haven't, because there's always more, to learn and more to develop. So thank you for all that, John.
Oh, you're so welcome. I mean, and I think we're both old enough that we've seen a lot, but I keep reminding myself, beginner's mind. And some days it's a little bit more effort than other days. Some days that I already know this voice is pretty loud, but it's more fun anyway, isn't it? To just keep learning. And so Oliver, you did 20 years in large corporations. And I feel like, you sent me over that pre-publication blog post. Will you where is that going to be? Because by the time this comes out, that'll probably be up, and people could go there and find your article. Because I think it's a good article, and maybe we can talk about just kind of the overarching idea in there. But where is that going to be posted? And I'll put it in the show notes too.
It's a global pharma and life science trade publication called Pharma Forum, both one word, both on P and H, pharma and forum, also spelled on ph.com. They're based in the UK. They work internationally. They work with all these large and then many smaller companies. And I was asked to develop and publish a blog on that publication to share some of the experiences I gained working in all these local and regional and global life science, communications jobs, and if I can, offer some little tips for people who are either in a large corporation of any type to better enjoy their big business career, or if you're a young person, a young professional aspiring to join one of those large corporations, maybe to help you prepare a little bit for that
Yeah.
setting and succeed in those large organizational settings. And as I said, enjoy them, and maybe with a cheeky smile, maybe even survive those
Yeah.
organizations better. So I call the whole series, which is emerging. I'm by the time this podcast publishes, you might look at the first, maybe at the second of those blog posts, but they'll be called along the lines of corporate survival hacks, and they're written with a twinkling eye. But I am sharing genuine experience, some of it very simple, very basic, but I hope very effective for people. It's basically ideas that I'm wanting others to know and ideally to benefit from, or match with their own, whatever has worked or is working for them as well. So this first one, I don't want to make it too long or too deep, but we're starting on my 10 top tips on time management, because how you manage your time, especially in these large industry jobs, will make a major difference for not only how you get through your day and what your quality of life is, but also how effectively you'll reach your goals that are set,
Yeah.
for you, or that you set yourself.
Yeah.
I keep thinking time management, maybe paired with good prioritization is probably the critical two things you must sort of have a plan for to succeed in these settings.
And Oliver, it's one of the things that's been coming up with me in some of my coaching sessions. It certainly comes up for me, for myself. Could we talk about prioritization for a second? And I'll tell you my particular question here. Prioritizing, I guess I could have known this before, but I just realized it when I was reading a book a few months ago, like 6 months ago, a year. It pointed out that prioritizing is one of the hardest things our brain does. There's nothing that's harder. It's on the same level as any other extremely difficult mental computation that we do. When you measure the brain, you see the glucose being used and the oxygen being used in the activity. Like it's among the hardest things we do, prioritizing. And I think that I am so lazy, Oscar, Oliver, excuse me. I have a nephew named Oscar, and his picture's right over there. I was looking at his picture. So I think I'm so lazy that instead of prioritizing for most of my life, I just tried to do it all because that actually seemed easier.
And I think that's particularly important. Just the realization in itself is important to succeed and enjoy a corporate role, because you're John, self-employed. You can make your own goals. I'm sure there's many powers that drive you and your business, but ultimately you're the boss. Imagine that person who sits in a large, maybe international organization, is one of 30,000 or 150,000 employees. There's no shortage of priorities coming at you from other people who are actually usually their priorities for you. But that's your boss, your peer, the business group you work with, your customer as well, your own team. So if you're not careful, if you don't develop that discipline or a approach, to setting your priorities, i.e., if you have no priorities, you're victim to being driven by other people's and maybe even random priorities that aren't really, the true priorities for the organization or for what you really have to achieve. So I don't consider myself a guru in this field. As I said, I'm sharing what's worked for me, what made a difference for me, what realization and experience I had after having changed my own approach to some of these things like time management or different approaches to prioritize my work. But one of the underlying very basic pieces of advice I like to tell people is first have a plan. Just whether it's plan A or B or C, I hardly care so much about, as long as you know how you go about prioritizing your day or your calendar. It's amazing how again, I don't want to lash out too much about large organizations. It's probably the same in very small organizations, as long as there are several people coming together, behind a piece of work or a project. But if you're not careful about, and you will notice, if you're not careful about what your day looks like, and you don't, at some point in my life, I realized if I don't start proactively blocking, simple example, blocking my own calendar for other people to see that there's, a chunk blocked in the morning that says, work through your emails, and another half hour that says feed your social media channels, and then there's probably 2 or 3 hours that says work quietly without interruption on key projects, those must achieve, must advance things. And then, of course, there's always a chunk in every person's day for meetings, for calls, for all the things that also have to happen. But if I just let it flow, to your point, then other events, other people will take over my day and my calendar completely, and they will start just dropping meetings into the white spaces they see, not knowing how could they, that I actually need to also advance real work and not just have 10 hours or 12 hours of calls and meetings a day and so forth. So first, have a plan. That's my very foundational simple advice.
Well, and and I think that it's really important, and it's something that I've gotten better at over the last several years, and especially that I I had to get much better at during the whole COVID thing, is to put time in my calendar where it's time for me to wrap things up, to get a handle on things, to prioritize, to lay out what I'm going to do next, to actually write up some of the things I need to write up, and because I was just getting dragged all over, like you were saying, by my clients' priorities, and I didn't have a real plan for when Lay was scheduling my coaching calls and things like that. So, now we've come up with much more of a plan of try to group these things together, try to give me some free block time. And I've blocked out some time myself and said, you can move this, but you can't schedule over it, things like that. And it just makes a huge difference.
I use color codes, John, and that's after I don't know 20 plus years of my career. I've started using color codes, and I actually, you mentioned Lay, who's a fantastic assistant, of course, to you. I had mine in Johnson & Johnson. You have to make them part of the plot. If you want them to be effective in the spirit of how you prioritize, they need to know how you're going about it. The color code thing is very simple, and that's just one suggestion. People might have different approaches and different ideas that work for them. I'm coloring my appointments in my calendars either green or yellow or red. The green ones is stuff that is usually project work, but it doesn't have to happen between 10 and 11 today. If my assistant or myself needs that window for something else important, we can move that green block to somewhere else, as long as it prevails somewhere in that week. The red ones, obviously, I'm not touching. That's firm commitments that need to happen at that very time, and take the time that they're in the calendar for. And then the yellow is somewhere in between. They're really important. And with my assistant, I'm typically asking her, if it's a yellow commitment you're needing to move, talk to me first. Let's jointly decide whether we can really shift that, whether it's more important to keep it in that slot, or we can shift it and swap it for something else. Brief wisdom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and simple solutions to that make you able to tackle complex problems, right?
Well, I hope they do. I hope they work for some, others who hear this and might think, let's try this out. I've not tried that before. I've learned so much from other people. And I have to say, to your topic and to your question about, prioritization and your own admission, in that area, I learned so much in my latest, job in Johnson & Johnson from my peers, from other people. And one of the critical things that was a real revelation for me was the thought of, if you make everything a priority, like you just sounded, there's so many important things. Of course, when you're self-employed, every client is probably equally important, or at least somewhere, equally important. But if everything and everybody becomes a priority, really nothing is.
No, yeah,
If all you look at
that's
is priorities, then what is really important, so it stands out as the one number one or number two or number three one. So a part of prioritizing effectively, in my view, also has to be to deprioritize other things and
yeah,
deciding, and that's a hard decision, both in large teams as well as an individual professional. It's a very, very hard, I find, to decide that anything is not supposed to be a key priority and maybe shouldn't
yeah,
be done at all, and or will be only done if there's enough time left at the end of the day or at the week. But
yeah,
effective prioritization requires you to also be hard on yourself and deprioritize some other things.
yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. One of the things that I offer some of the people that I coach with is, you could always say, well, what would you like me to deprioritize to get this done? Because it is actually, like everybody has 24 hours and everybody only has 24 hours. And, and I think that we're getting a lot clearer on the importance of sleeping during some of
Oh
that
God,
time.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And then I don't know about you, John. My natural tendency has always also been for a long time when I look at all this load of things that need to happen today, that I tend or used to tend to start on the easy ones, the quick ones, all the
Well, of
stuff you want to
course,
get out of the
yeah.
way, to then
Yeah.
properly at the end of the day be able to really focus on the one big, really important thing. I learned over time
Yeah.
that never happens, because by the
No,
time you get to lunch, I mean, there's so much more piled on your calendar and your day's agenda that it takes you ages, and then you shift the big thing over to the next day and over to the next day and over to the end of the week.
yeah.
So I have, and that wasn't easy for me at least. I've turned around that approach completely, and when I can, I really try to start on the big, massive, that daunting big thing. But I
Yeah.
know if that's the big priority, if that's probably the only or one of the top two priorities, I really need to start there. And if I
Yeah.
get to it, then cover the smaller fry at the end, or again, decide to ditch some of them.
Yeah. Well, in your article, which I think people should go find and read because I think it's good, um, you talked about something that I had a big problem with for a long time. I would go through my email, I would put all the important stuff aside,
Yeah, yeah,
answer all the unimportant stuff,
yeah,
and then never ever get
yeah,
back to the important stuff. I was like doing opposite
yeah.
prioritizing. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not working.
Yeah. Well, I that's one of the things and I didn't invent this. I read that, I heard it somewhere, and that's one of the things I really, really decided to apply at the very point of my career. I remember almost the week when I changed my approach to dealing with emails, because up to that point, I was exactly like you're just describing. But that advice that I read and then consequently began to apply was, I call it a one-touch policy. So every email I've developed a discipline to touch every email once only. If it's an important email, it's important enough to get it out of the way now, act upon it, do something with it. But up to that point, what I used to do was, with the big daunting emails, I would open them, read them, think through quickly, what approach I would take, then close it there again, because it takes too much time now, focus on all the other fry, and then in the evening or the next day, open it again, which means you need additional time to read it again. You need to develop your fresh thinking about it. You're probably closing it once again to then deal with it on the weekend when you have more time. And I stopped doing that at some point. And that was one of the biggest. I still have a crazy full email box, but it made
Yeah.
such a difference to develop the discipline to say, I'm touching it once and decide there on the spot, is it important enough to act upon it? In which case I do act now. If it takes, whether it
Yeah.
takes 15 minutes or 2 minutes, I get it out of the way. Might be something I decide to file, which I also see as acting upon it. So I put it in a file, so I can, in a filing system, so I can find it when I need it, and I need to refer to it later. Or the only third path is, deprioritize it and delete it. And again, the other effect it has, John, for me at least, is I like a clear view of my priorities, including my email priorities.
Yeah.
So when
Yeah.
there's hundreds or thousands of emails sitting there, either opened or unopened, it obscures my view, I find, of what's really important. When I deal with every email quickly and just screen through them and apply this one-touch policy, it helps me keep my mailbox down and file things away or delete them, and keeps my view on of what's important, what's relevant, what needs to be done today or tomorrow.
Yeah, it's good.
It's helped me.
Yeah. So we do. So it's speak like a leader, and I think we're getting we're kind of getting near the end of the time that we've got. But I wonder what are from your 20 years of leading comms at these large global organizations and working with diverse audiences and diverse clientele and diverse leaders that you're supporting from all kinds of different countries and backgrounds and cultures, what are a couple of things that you would just think are important for people to think about if they want to have an impact out there in the world and they want to make a difference and they want to be great leaders and great communicators? What are some things, like, as you look back over that arc of 20 years, what are some recurring themes maybe?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the cross-cultural experience I've had, because once I'm really proud of that particular opportunity, and it's helped me learn a lot about humans and the difference and the diversity across the planet in humans. But also it's helped me understand more, at least, about the importance of being culture savvy in senior leader speaking, and also their coaching process. Both, to bring out the best in those speakers like me from other cultural and language backgrounds, as you can hear, with any kind of audience, as well as make them more effective with their international. Today, typically in these large organizations, at least, we are speaking to international audiences internally as well as externally. So, and that's where I know you have a lot of experience and clients in all these, diverse cultural settings as well, John. So I know you know what I'm talking about and appreciate that. But more to your point, and I'm trying to put it simply. I mean, the one point I've made twice or three times in this conversation that I'm big on is about emotion. I think any investment in the right content, have the right facts at hand, the right examples to convince an audience, that's fine. But if you don't manage to connect emotionally with that audience, to excite them, to fascinate them, to inspire them, then you've likely failed in that job of speaking. Whether that is, to your earlier example, convince a board of some business idea, or convince a journalist or any kind of audience. So you need to work on that ability to tell a great story. Maybe my other point, let me make two more points, both very simple. My one other point is also to keep things simple. I think the greatest stories are usually not that are relatable, that are easy to understand, easy to follow, easy to act upon. They are usually really clear, really simple concepts. They're not convoluted with everything, say, a scientist knows about their science. The greatest speakers among the scientists, they have this ability to break down everything they know to what's really important for the audience to know, and catch them in that sweet spot. And then once you've hooked the audience and they are attentive and they give you a bit more listening time, then you can expand the story and tell them more about the background and how you got there and what other alternatives you tried and all that. And maybe my third and final point here is to achieve that. I think it's a really, really important investment of time and energy, and sometimes some budget as well, to work with professional coaches, trainers, maybe your in-house communications partner, but there's fabulous external coaches like yourself as well who can help. I think to save in that area of effective speaking, effective communication is a big miss in those places where companies try to save there, because if you lose that effect, if you lose that ability to tell a great story and convince first the inside employees and get them behind your business and your business concepts, but also then the external world around you, your client base, the partners you need, maybe the politicians and decision makers you need, to succeed with your strategy or your service or your product. If you fail there, you failed a great deal. And the science might be very compelling, the product might be fabulous, but if you can't communicate it appropriately, if you can't open the eyes of an audience, of a customer, of a patient, in the case of the healthcare industry, you might not invest in developing that product or that medicine in the first place, because nobody will want to have it. So I hope that's not too bold, but I've seen the difference between great professionals, great business leaders, and the difference between that and the same great business leaders and professionals, plus having been, developing those great communications and speaking skills. And when you look across the ranks in large and small organizations of who typically is at the top, at the helmet leading these organizations, they're all good at their professional background usually, but those real senior leaders, they're usually then, in addition, terrific as a spokesperson.
Yeah. You remind me of something that dawned on me fairly recently. I realized that I was really suffering from the fact that I was always the best speaker at the conference, which doesn't sound so bad. If I wasn't the best speaker, I was one of the top 3, but that's a real problem. I think that's a real problem, because what was happening is, I was the best speaker at the conference, like one of the top 2 or 3 best speakers, but the bar was so low, right? I was never going to reach my full potential by being the best speaker at this conference or that conference, and in a way, that was holding me back from reaching my full potential. So, I'm really glad that I went to TED and kind of got a little slap in the face about that, because that's what had me realize that this is just a mountain without a top. And it just makes all the difference in the world. An idea in my head is just a fantasy. If I can't communicate it out into the world, it makes no difference at all. So I think that's one of the fulfilling things about what you and I do, is to really have people's way of communicating about their ideas match how great their ideas are. Yeah,
exactly. How do you, in my background, particularly of innovation communications, how do you communicate effectively compelling, groundbreaking innovation without communicating innovatively, right?
Yeah. Right.
The juxtaposition.
That's so funny. So funny.
Thank you, John, for the nice, warm, lovely tasting virtual coffee you offered me over this breakfast conversation that we had.
You are
really
so
enjoyed
welcome.
That.
I'm really, really grateful to you for taking the time. I really, it's really good to hear these things. It's really good to reconnect with you. I wish you a lot of fun in the garden, and I'm sure that people can reach out to you via LinkedIn if they want to talk to you. We will put that into the show notes, and I gave your LinkedIn address at the beginning. Anything else you'd like to say to just wrap it up?
Not really. You've made my point. I love to stay connected with people. I now have had the opportunity of developing such a large and international network, which has been a great pleasure to work in that global way for a person with a small country personal background like me. So thank you for inviting me to your program. I hope people will at least have found the one or other thought that made you think, well, I could probably try that out, maybe the email prioritization thing or something else. If not, happy to have people connect with me for more of my sometimes conventional wisdom, sometimes hopefully wisdom that is a bit more helpful. But I'm really, really happy to connect and stay connected. So please, via LinkedIn, John mentioned the profile, do reach out. Happy to stay in conversation.
And then one final thing before we go, I know that you are developing walking tours.
Oh God,
So
yeah.
where are you? Because they'd have to be in person for that. Where
Yeah,
are you located these days?
well, physically now I've moved to Europe, where I'm from. I'm physically now near Vienna in Austria.
Uh-huh.
Yes, I am developing walking workshops for team building, for bonding, for communications workshops of some types as well. I don't want to go big on here. I'm still in the development of that, but I found that when you coach people and groups, teams during a process of activity, as long as they don't get too distracted.
Yep.
You don't want to do this over sophisticated sports games or something. But the fact of an underlying activity that brings a lot of oxygen into your blood, into your brain, does help scientifically with certain aspects of what you want to achieve. So let me leave it there. I'm developing them at the moment with the view of me coming into that location pretty much on demand, getting to know it. It doesn't take long, some really good walks and sometimes easy hikes in the vicinity. I've developed some for Vienna, as I said, but also for London, UK, where I used to live for a while and where I'm very familiar with the outskirts of London and the great walks along the River Thames and other
Yeah.
places.
Yes.
That's the underlying idea. So watch this space, or rather watch my LinkedIn page, perhaps, because there might
Great.
be a great new concept coming people's way to try out with their teams.
Sounds great. Good. Well, Oliver, I'll look forward to staying in touch, and thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week. And
Absolute pleasure,
everyone,
John. Thank you.
you're welcome. And everybody, thank you for joining me again on the Speak Like a Leader podcast. I just want to say that if you would like to develop your TED-like talk, we are doing Speak Like a Leader experience cohorts. So it's 8 people over 10 weeks developing your TED-like talk with great support. And you can find that at my website, executivespeakingsuccess.com. And if you want to go directly to the courses, you can go to ed for education, ed.executivespeakingsuccess.com. Thanks very much for joining us. I will look forward to being with you next time. Oliver Stohlmann, really appreciate you being here. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.